For it TV. The world is thinking.
Hello and welcome to the first debate of 3 debates today that make up the battle for new technologies. My name's Shirley Dent from the Institute of Ideas, and I'll be chairing this debate, MySpace Generation, Why the Hype and Hysteria. Now, we've got a cracking panel here for you for this debate, but before we kick off, just a few quick thank yous. I'd like to thank my co-producers for this session, Alex Hercule, Martin Perks, Norman Lewis and Wendy Earle. I'd also like to thank BT, who are the headline sponsors of the entire festival and who have a special interest in new technologies and widening out the debate about new technologies. That is moving beyond the technical nuts and bolts to what these new technologies mean to and say about us and our society. And I think the MySpace generation issue is one of those issues that seems inescapable at the moment. Perhaps that's because it touches on the future in many and varied ways. We all know that MySpace, Facebook, YouTube, Bebo, etc., are popular with the young. And I'm sure that some figures will come out in this discussion about that. That at-homeness of the under-25s with new technology has led to the coining of the term digital natives. And it's that term really that we're going to get down and interrogate a little bit here this morning. We seem to have been caught between panic and praise about this phenomena, between loathing and lauding. On the panic side, just to give you 2 issues that seem to come up quite a lot, porn and bullying. In February, Nielsen Net Ratings reported on a survey that 1 in 4 teenagers view porn online once a month. Hot on the heels of that study was an LSE study that said 6 in 10 children in the UK are exposed to porn, mostly as a result of viewing it accidentally online. If we move then to bullying, and I think the sort of hysteria around MySpace generation is summed up in this Daily Mail journalist soundbite where she asked, is Bebo becoming a lord of the flies in cyberspace? We also had a teachers' union, the NASUWT, calling for pupils' mobile phones to be classed as potentially offensive weapons in the classroom. And this wasn't just about bullying fellow pupils, it was about bullying teachers. So that's the panic and the loathing. On the other hand, the praise and lauding, it seems as though everybody wants to get a slice of the MySpace generation action. We've had Hillary Clinton with her YouTube appeal for a presidential campaign song. We've also had a report in The Guardian in 2006. I think this sums up quite a lot about the digital natives phenomena. Head teachers employing students, their own students, to get around a perceived gap in ICT skills. And one head teacher in this report commented, every parent who lives with a teenager will know that it's the teenagers who know how to work the technology because they are fearless. So today we have a fearless panel to unwrap this issue for you, and I'm going to introduce them in the order they're going to speak. And I have to warn you, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be tight on time. So first of all, to kick us off, we have Dr. Norman Lewis, who's the Chief Strategy Officer of Wireless Grid Corporation. Prior to joining WGC, he was the Director of Technology Research at Orange, where his research team were recognised as internet thought leaders across the world. Norman's current focus is on the subject of digital children and their encounter with innovation and risk-averse culture. Speaking of which, Norman has a book coming out with Continuum called, wait for it, Digital Kids, Children's Encounter with Innovation in a Risk-Averse Culture. Does what it says on the tin. So that's Norman. Talking of doing what it says on the tin, our second speaker, Raj Anand, is Technical Director at Quick.com, which, as the name suggests, is a social networking system designed for rapid deployment, simple setup, and easy extensibility. Wow. Raj, at 23, set up Understand Limited and developed the majority of software there. He has been nominated for Europe's Young Entrepreneur 2007 by Business Week. So that's Raj for you. Then we've got MT Rainey. And today you really are going to hear about social networking and young people from the horse's mouth. MT set up www.horsesmouth.co.uk, which is a social networking site which, in the words of MT, which I pilfer it from a Sunday Times article, is a kind of MySpace for business, an eBay of experiences, and we're going to hear more about that later. Prior to Horse's Mouth, MT was founder, joint CEO and chair of the top 5 UK advertising agency, Rainey, Kelly, Campbell and Rolfe. And last but not least, we have Robin Walsh, the young buck on the panel, maybe, who seems to be, to me, a living embodiment of much of the multifaceted, maybe multi-talented MySpace generation. Robin's a producer of scientific conferences and a freelance writer on such youthful issues as binge drinking and Second Life. He's also a member of the Battle of Ideas Committee, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, you're a bit of a techie geek, aren't you, Robin? Okay, so that's the panel, and I'm going to ask Norman now to get us started.
Right, thank you. Good morning. For those of you who can't see properly, I'm not young, and I make no apology for that. I don't think you need to be young to understand what's going on in this space. That's my first point. I think the thing that strikes me about this discussion about young people and technology and around all the social networking and everything is that it seems to me everything seems to be upside down. We are told, for example, that young people are really into this because young people are into technology and that they're really good at technology. They're kind of naturally good at this. We're told, on the other hand, that this is a discussion about young people and technology, but actually when you examine the discussion and you examine the literature around this, it's not really about young people and technology, it's about old people, adults in particular, and their preoccupations with what young people are doing, which they don't understand. And they don't really ask the kids because what they're concerned about is the policy issues and all the fears and the dangers. So we don't really have a real discussion. There's something really going on here that's misunderstood. All we can see is young people using technology, and we think that as a result of this, that they are into this and that there is something unique going on here. I want to demystify this. I think that there's something new going on and there's something old, a kind of continuity in this discussion. You know, young people have always, as they have gone through life stages, appropriated the world around them and made it their own as part of how they grow up and how they become adults in the world. If you go back to the 50s and the 60s, you will see generations, for example, adopted comics or there was a whole big craze around Davy Crockett. I haven't got time to go into that. It's a very interesting case study to look at. Cars, comics, music, they have adopted artifacts and technologies at different stages and adapted them and adopted them according to their own requirements. And that kind of says to me that that's where we need to focus our attention. What is it about young people and about their experiences that makes them so amenable to digital technologies? What is it about what has happened in their childhoods, their lived experience, that makes digital media such an attractive outlet for them, and how they've appropriated that as part of their culture? I think it's the contemporary experience of childhood which is the decisive question that we really need to focus on if we're going to get underneath this often very superficial descriptive discussion about what's going on. I suppose the biggest point I would make about what's happened with young kids is that childhood has really fundamentally changed. And it's through the prism of understanding how this has happened, particularly around the concepts of risk, that childhood has been reorganized in ways that has had very significant consequences. For example, I think if you look at childhood today, it's if the whole discussion is one about how children are at risk. They're at risk from their health, from outdoor activities, indoor activities, online activities. Family life is a sphere of risk for them. Peer relations is a sphere of risk. Encounters with adults is fraught with risk. Risk is the motif through which young people engage with the world, and indeed how their parents understand that world. So what's happened as a consequence of this is that there's been a major shift from the kind of unauthorized or disorganized space of childhood experience into a more organized space, where whether it's in the home or outdoors, children today are growing up more in the presence of adults than they ever have in the past. They haven't got the freedoms that, for example, I had when I was growing up. You know, when I used to come home from school, my mother used to say, "Get out the house, I don't want to see you till dinner." You know, can you imagine any parent doing that today? If you're going to get out the house today, you know, your mother's going to take you to somewhere. There's going to be supervised a play, or there'll be another adult present, or whatever. Everything has become much more organized. So in fact, what's happened is that children are spending much more time in the company of adults than they ever have in the past. And this applies to both outdoors and indoors. And it's quite interesting that if you look at some of the surveys that are done on this, I've got one, for example, from the University of Michigan, which charted this change from 1981 to 1997. This got an interesting point. 1981, they already then were seeing a change in how children were growing up. That they found that their free time available to children dropped by about 16% in this time, and that outdoor activities declined by a staggering 50% in this period. And this is what's important about this statistic, is that this is prior to any of the big discussion about technology, about what is happening around technology. So what's happened here is that children, as a consequence of this, I think have had to seek refuge in the virtual world as a way where they can create some autonomy for themselves, some space that they can operate in. And that's why you will find that sites called MySpace, not your space or daddy's space or mommy's space or family space, but MySpace is something that is so attractive to them precisely because it's a space where they can do what kids need to do as they're growing up, which is to create a space for themselves, experiment with their personalities, experiment with their identities, create peer relations with other people, of like-minded people, appropriate popular culture and use that as part of the way that they construct themselves in the world. And that to me is the kind of begins to explain why something like MySpace takes off in the way that it has, and why nobody really anticipated. This was like taken by surprise. A very important dimension to this, which is the final point I want to look at, which is this point about, are they technically whiz kids and all of that. Because the point that flows from understanding this very subtle change that has occurred is that the kids adopt and appropriate this technology because the technology becomes the means through which they can experiment with, they can express themselves, they can gain acknowledgement from their peers, they can create the relationships that you and I perhaps used to do in the playground or outside of school or whatever, that we were able to do as peers amongst each other. And so the kids are attracted to this technology precisely because it enables them to do that. And what's important here is that that's why they engage with it so passionately, because it becomes so fundamental to who they are and how they represent themselves in the world, that they are so passionate about the technology. That's what we are looking at as adults and what we can't understand, because our relationship to the technology is much more episodic. It's we use it for work, or we might use it for a little bit of surfing or whatever. We do not live the technology in the same way that this generation does. And that's what's different about this generation in that sense. But they are not naturally good at this. In fact, the point about young people and technologies and devices is that they have no structured approach to learning. They have no fear. They have no sense of the value of the they will play and they will test and they will do because it's just a device for them. It's just another thing that they can play with or whatever. It's just play that they're engaged with. They're like monkeys, you know. It's like they can watch somebody putting a DVD into a thing, press a button, and they can watch the screen. They have no understanding of what's going on there. And of course,
Norman, on that note, I'm going to have to hurry you a little bit.
Okay, sorry. The real point here is that we elevate them in this way, because what this really expresses about this relationship is that we as adults have kind of lost confidence in ourselves and in our ability to deal with this technology, because the technology, quite frankly, more often than not is crap, and we have real difficulty using it. But we mystify this and we mythologize this as a consequence, and as a result we flatter children about what's so good about their engagement with this technology, when in fact what we should be doing is slapping them about a bit and getting them to understand more about the technology, so that they themselves can create technology as opposed to playing with it.
Okay, thank you, Norman. Raj, over to you.
Thanks, Shirley. Good morning. My name is Raj Anand. I'm the founder of a Brighton-based company called Quick. We supply blue-chip clients with their own online communities, the technology basically. So things like MySpace and Facebook for corporate clients. We supply it to companies like First Choice, Cedar, Times of India, and several other corporates globally. On another personal note, I won Business Week's Europe's Young Entrepreneur this year. So before I start my chat with you guys, how many of you guys over here have a Facebook or a MySpace account? Just raise your hands for me, please. Absolutely brilliant, isn't it? Okay, so as you know, Facebook, Bebo, MySpace, etc., allows you to build your own profile, add friends to it, and then allows you to keep in touch with your mates or your colleagues online. To give you an idea, Bebo, an online community primarily for young people, have 7.15 million users in the UK alone. Give another example of technologies, MSN, Instant Messenger by the giant Microsoft, allows you to obviously have a text or voice chat with your friends online. And as it turns out, 79.8% of 18 to 24-year-olds in the UK are on Instant Messenger every day. For younger audience, these tools reduce the distance between them and their mates, and it's a trivial way to kind of communicate, invite people for their friends, their house parties, share music, URLs, websites, and just keep in touch generally. For some younger bands, like MySpace has been perhaps the only way they could, communicate with their audience. And with 10 million users in the UK alone, obviously this is a nice platform to start your music campaign. And I'm also the mentor for City College in Brighton, and I'm talking to them about how they use MySpace or MSN, and they often spend a lot of time on MSN discussing their homework. They have actually replaced encyclopedias with Wikipedias and Google, so you can see the benefits of these technologies as well. To discover music like Last FM and MySpace is a brilliant way to do that. And to share pictures, you can do using Flickr. So obviously, these websites and technologies are being used in a very nice way as well. As you could imagine, these so-called digital natives, basically users below 20 years of age, have used in creative ways. For instance, at Quick, we built a family holiday social network for First Choice. The site is called holidaystyles.co.uk. Check it out if you want to. Approximately half the users are under 18 years of age. And they have 4 times more friends on their profiles than any other user. So to kind of give an idea of, they spend a lot of time on these sites, obviously. They can literally build their profiles in their sleep. They can pimp their profile if they wanted to. It's the kind of the real know-hows of these sites. They really know it really well. The question really lies, is this for real? And I think the answer is definitely yes. The widespread use of these social networks and technologies has encouraged even the adult audience to start Facebooking. So I see a lot of guys Facebooking over here and log on to business networks like LinkedIn or eAcademy. Gone are the days when executives in the boardroom decided which music will they be promoted, and MySpace has replaced that comprehensively. Clearly, we are using technology because they are invaluable to us for various people and for various purposes, like to find jobs to LinkedIn.com, send messages using your mobile phones or through Facebook. It's obvious that these tools are encourage communication, which has led to innovation for all of us. And I'm convinced these are not just jumping on a bandwagon. Right, the question really now is that what are the issues surrounding these technologies? And obviously, while the aim is to communicate with mates, there'll be intruders, pedophiles, stalkers. On a site, bigaloo.com, they did a survey of 2 million profiles, and they found that 1 in 3 children profile have their contact details available freely, which obviously isn't good. Saying that digital natives actually ban people to contact them, they could block them or just delete them from their friends list. So the question lies, what should we do? And my suggestions are, as online community developers, we should be thinking of building more privacy features into our online communities. follow guidelines like COP, that's child exploitation guidelines set up by the government. I know Bebo.com follows the guidelines to the word, really. So, I mean, we could obviously follow, for example. And yes, the websites, MySpace, Facebook, texting, etc., are not 100% safe for the MySpace generation. But the question is, isn't that something we see in real life or offline anyway? Thank you.
Thank you. Just on that note, if you're interested in the privacy issue, privacy online, the last debate today is on privacy, so stick around for that one. On that note, well, maybe not on that note, but over to MT.
I'm very happy to be participating in this binge thinking weekend, much better than what I usually do. But I'm really not going to say very much in this preface because I'm not sure we'll get great debate among the panel. We're probably more likely to get it from you because I think we're all saying some of the similar, unless Shirley wades in, it's probably possible. We seem to be saying a lot of the same things, and I would certainly reiterate what the previous two speakers have said. I asked my I was spending half term with my nieces who are range between 8 and 15, so a great little focus group for this. And I spent a lot of time with them over the last 6 days, and I asked my 14-year-old niece, who was literally spending about 4 hours every day on MySpace, what she thought the MySpace generation was, and she, without hesitation, in fact, she didn't even look up from the screen. I mean, she literally could have the conversation without looking up from the screen. She said, yeah, the core of it is 11 to 16. That would be my age group. And we use it to hang out with friends because we're not allowed to do that really in real life, are we? Because you lot don't like us too. So I can't hang about in parks. I can't hang about in shopping malls because you're all scared. So this is where we do it. We do online. So her analysis was pretty right on, I think, given what Norman was saying. She also said, yeah, and if there's anyone older than 16 on MySpace, it's because they're really into music or they're up to no good. But we know how to spot them. So she had that completely. That is probably a great analysis of MySpace. So she knew how to spot. She felt she knew how to spot the people that were up to no good. That she felt that she was savvy enough, and she and her friends were savvy enough to know what those people kind of looked like, even in a hidden profile. And then she said, yeah, and at university and after that, it's really people like you, old people like you, on Facebook. So Facebook has now been relegated by the MySpace generation to the older thing, which is fine. Yes, we like that. And then what she actually did was I showed her my Facebook page, and she actually pronounced it cool. That was quite good. And then she hijacked it while I was off making dinner, and she sent lots of embarrassing pictures of cats to my sophisticated friends under my username. So that was she thought that was extremely funny, which in fact it was. So I think really, I mean, just to my point of view on this, for the sake of argument, is extremely positive and optimistic. I think that I know there is an alternative argument which is more dystopian about what can happen online and what can happen, what it all means. We can talk about lots of bad C words, that, you know, the dumbing down, everything ends up being crap. We end up being controlled by confederacies of dunces, coalitions of mad collaborators on mad issues, and all of that can happen as it does in life. But to focus on these things that are happening at the margins in a way that allows us to ignore the fantastic potential that is now unleashed and available to us through this wonderful thing called the internet and the web, and particularly some of the things that are being built there that allow us to find each other and reach out to each other in completely new ways. So I'm incredibly positive about the whole thing, and think that's the most helpful, constructive way to look at it. So in the end, I'm a digital humanist, certainly not a native, but just a humanist. I mean, what happens online will be human-scaled and human-sized. We don't need to be deterministic about it. If we think that people are in aggregate good, then good things will happen, and potentially extremely good things can happen, extremely exciting new things, new ways of doing things can happen online. My own organisation that we're starting is probably one of the first things, which is what I would call the Web for Good movement. So it's actually looking at how we can actually use the tools of the web for socially purposeful things rather than just socially playful things. and Horse's Mouth is a mentoring network that uses all the tools of social networking and all the fun aspects of that, and couples it with our interest in giving something back to each other and in sharing our experiences with other people. So I think this might be one of the first ways that we see the web being used for socially purposeful things, and I think there's a great potential there. I think that's really all I want to say. Happy to answer lots more questions in our debate later.
Thank you, MT. Robin, finish us off.
All right. Well, I was going to start off with a rubbish joke about how I was the honorary young person on the panel, but as Raj is only a couple of years older than me, it doesn't work anymore. I essentially more or less agree with the other people on the panel that the day-to-day use of social networking, computer games and other kind of IT tools by most young people is actually very safe and quite normal. It's actually quite mundane, a lot of it. It doesn't move much beyond the who fancies who and so-and-so got wasted last weekend, kind of staples of teenage conversation which have always been around. For me, the really interesting part is the debate itself that young people and technology, this debate is actually about old people and their perceptions of young people rather than about anything that young people actually get up to themselves. So for me, two prime examples of this kind of silly debate come from the American cop show CSI. So back in 2005, there was an episode of CSI Miami called Urban Hellraisers. Dealt with a group of young people who played a computer game that bore more than a passing resemblance to Grand Theft Auto Vice City, which, for those of you over 30, is a very entertaining and quite violent computer game from recent years. So, in this episode, these crazy kids played so much computer games they had their brains addled and went around committing violent bank robberies and murders. It was banned by the BBFC on the basis it was supposedly sadistic. And also, I think it was also to do with, there was a murder committed back in 2004, which was essentially spuriously linked to Manhunt 1. Another game, World of Warcraft, has come in for stick recently. It's supposedly highly addictive and responsible for a number of deaths. So, with some of this new technology, computer games in particular, we have a debate that's very similar to the debate on binge drinking. Or ASBOs. So young people are either kind of immoral thugs who need to be regulated, or they're addicted victims who have to be regulated as well. But the really weird part of this debate is when older people in the media aren't panicking about this new technology, they're getting overexcited. So we come back to my second example from CSI, because a couple of weeks ago it was announced that CSI New York are due to produce an episode based on and in the computer game Second Life. Which, for those of you lucky enough not to have heard of it, it's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game where you live your life, but virtually. It seems to be a keen favourite amongst middle-aged journalists who won't shut up about it. CSI's maker, Anthony Zucker, got very excited in a New York Times interview about the game's potential to set puzzles to be solved by players online, to connect with the storyline. There's no death by Red Bull here. It has been impossible to avoid painfully inane articles about the world and life-changing possibilities of this game recently. Newsnight, The New Scientist and the broadsheets have all been amongst those kind of wetting themselves over it. The Guardian held a virtual music festival in Second Life. Universities are hosting seminars in Second Life, and companies like IBM and BMW are marketing in it as well. The euphoria that's greeted Second Life is almost matched by that around Facebook. If you take a look at the Times Online or the Guardian and just have a look at some of the articles, I did a search a few days ago and found that in the last year there were 577 articles on Facebook on the Guardian website, but only 314 on Burma. Burma's a country of 50 million people, and I'm sure a far more important thing, in terms of world politics than Facebook is. Possibly the most embarrassing aspect of this kind of attempt to colonise new technology is that done by politicians. Forget web camera and check out the number of MPs that are on Facebook. A favourite of mine is the appropriately named Steve Webb, who's a high-ranking Liberal Democrat MP. He's in charge of writing their manifesto and asked his Facebook friends to write suggestions on his Facebook profile about what to include in the manifesto. So this kind of rather embarrassing attempt to engage young people, it raises a couple of questions for me. First of all, if he ignores the kind of silly suggestions put on his Facebook profile, then it's just another episode a kind of patronising spin towards young people. But if he takes it seriously, then for me that's an even more kind of worrying sign of how far gone the Liberal Democrats are. There's no more thrashing out political ideals in a meeting hall or even in a smoke-filled room. It's now write on my wall and make policy. Facebook, it obviously does have great potential as possibly as a political organising tool. It works perfectly well to organise house parties at the moment, but it isn't a magic wand to cure political disaffection. So I think the fact that these kind of completely contradictory opinions, that it's either a panacea or a thing to cause panic, can be held almost simultaneously by the same people, show that this debate isn't really about young people or technology after all. It's about an adult population who often fear and mistrust the young, but they've also lost a certain degree of confidence in their ability to know what's best. So they're left in awe of the confidence and perceived expertise of young people and try and regain some of their lost dynamism by leaping onto that technological bandwagon. The final factor is a political elite with no ideals left in search of a technological fix to a sociological and ideological problem. So I think essentially the lesson is we should chill out, let kids play Halo and cultivate their MySpace pages in peace, and find something more useful to fill up our lives with than just Facebook. So here we go.
Okay, thank you to everyone for some cracking introductions. I'm going to go out to the floor very soon, but before that I've just got a few questions of my own which I want to throw at the panel. And Robin, I'm going to start with you. I think you did a cracking defence of the MySpace generation, and you've almost got me convinced. Almost. But being an old git, I'm going to ask an old git question. You said, we chill out. We just are using this to organise house parties, etc. It's just a useful tool to organise socially. It's like a diary almost. Are you not being slightly, actually quite a bit disingenuous here? Because however much you say that, this MySpace, Facebook, whatever, is still celebrated. It is as a radical new world, a radical new space, all of this exciting stuff happening there. And I've got to say, when I go onto a lot of these blogs, onto a lot of the MySpace pages, it does seem that there is the most anodyne, uncritical and unchallenging stuff there that is celebrated as whoopee-doo-dah, something fantastic. My question to you is, I think peer pressure, and we heard about peer pressure from a few of the panellists, is a good thing. I am not so convinced by peer platitudes, which this technology seems to facilitate. Am I just an old fogey?
Possibly, but no. I think that kind of the idea that telling someone that they're wrong, which I think is what you're getting at, is that somehow that no one does it anymore is somehow a problem with the internet. I think if you go out and look in wider society more generally, any kind of aspect, you go to a school. You go to a school. The kind of possibly a silly example, but the kind of non-competitive sports, things like that, the schools are advocating the idea that somehow people on Facebook who take each other incredibly seriously when what they're talking is crap is a thing that's limited just to people on MySpace and just to young people. I think it's people talking crap is a thing that is unfortunately throughout all of society. So,
okay, okay. I'm just going to turn to MT now because I want to the Web for Good movement and this business about digital humanism and being a digital humanist. Just want to unpick this a little bit because I've got to say I'm slightly sceptical about this. And my question to you is because I like humanism. I'm down with, okay. I'm with you on that one. But my question to you is this: is social networking online really what we want for the next generation of humanists? If we want a new generation of people who have humanist ideals. To me, it seems that often with the social networking online, you've got this uncritical acceptance that social relations can just be managed at the end of a keyboard by the click of a mouse. And my question to you, just to add on to this, is can you really reduce the complexity of our relations to a Twitter message or even an M-factor rating. And I think Rainey will explain what an M-factor rating is. But for me, I've got to say there's actually something more dehumanising about that. Over to you, MT.
Well, I was using the term digital humanist to refer overall to my belief that all this new technology doesn't produce new behaviours or new ways that people will relate. They will relate in the same way through new media. So it's just, I suppose I'm using the term humanism in that I don't think we will suddenly grow different organs and let certain other organs decline because of this. I think it is just it's just a way of saying things happen in life, and if they happen in life, they'll happen online. And so we're not suddenly creating lots of new possibilities for new things to happen, although it can happen in new ways. So that's really what I meant by that. But and also I think the humanist term, just because simply I do have a view that people are in aggregate good, and therefore what we can make happen online will in aggregate be good, as opposed to evil at the edges, or as well as being evil at the edges or difficult at the edges. The question of whether or not online relationships are real, I believe they are. I think that there is no one is saying that online relationships are a substitute for real relationships or ever will be, but the kinds of relationships that people can forge online, perhaps with people they don't know well, perhaps with people they don't know at all, in the case of Horse's Mouth, because they're connecting with them for a particular reason, like being mentored on a career choice, or being mentored on the fact that we may have a similar family experience, or we may suffer from the same health condition. That's why we're talking to people there. Those relationships can be very real. They're not ersatz. They're not a minor version of something else. They're just different. They don't substitute for friendship, as it's really practiced by people when they meet each other, and they don't substitute for family. But they are nevertheless real relationships. They are not ersatz. So I would defend the fact that online relationships are not all being reduced to Twitters either. There's some extensive relationships happening online.
Well, I mean,
it's not all short.
I would agree with that, but I would agree that there are that there's a huge potential online with these sites, and the technology itself and gives us huge potential to connect in ways that just would have been impossible, say, 20 years ago. But my question, let's get to the M factor thing. So the M factor on Horse's Mouth is that you can rate people as a mentor. So they get 5 stars for being a good mentor. So let's just take this example. My question really here is that it's kind of like it's almost managerial. It's kind of putting those relationships into a pigeonhole, and I'm very sceptical about that, I've got to say.
Well, the M factor rating on Horse's Mouth is similar to those of you who might have used eBay. It's an attempt to create a user-generated rating system so that the community can create some kind of quality among its membership, and that quality can be recognised and displayed, so that people can seek out people who have aptitude and interest in actually what the site is doing. It also allows the site to create super users who eventually help control and manage and police the site, and that's how all the online communities who have a duty of care, and they don't all have a duty of care, but all of the ones who have, and eBay would have also, because it wants to be concerned that people on the whole have a good experience. That's called a reputation system, and it's trying to mimic, in a way, the ability for reputations to be accumulated in real life, and that's a useful tool online because it allows us to make certain choices. I don't think anyone is taking it so seriously that they think it's a dimensionalizing of a human being in a particularly serious way. Also, it's not just a simple rating system to defend the N factor. It's got some soft qualitative things in it too. But it's just a way to say this person's doing this a lot. They seem to be pretty good at it. People have found them helpful. It's a perfectly valid way to create a way of defining the users and helping some of them be more, reward them for being more active.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to now throw a question the same question to both Raj and Norman, which is this business about social entrepreneurship. And basically my question is, what does social entrepreneurship mean? It seems to be something particularly connected with the MySpace generation and social networking, but this new idea of entrepreneurship which seems to be gets thrown around. What does it mean? I've got a terrible deja vu of the lauding of the dot-com generation. And my question, that's what I really want to know from both of you. I mean, you're the Young Entrepreneur of the Year, Raj, and we've got somebody who's been involved in innovation. Are we using it in the same way as we would have used it about, say, somebody like Gutenberg? Does it mean something different now? That's my question to you both. Raj, do you want to?
Sure. So I've got a few friends who are working on social entrepreneurship on web.com kind of startups, and I mean, to kind of give you a few examples, kiva.org, that's kiva.org, meetup.com, which is a social you can use for social meetings, and the idea really is that you have the contacts on your Facebook, on your MySpace profiles. Now, obviously, a big part of your social entrepreneurship is to make contacts, get the maximum of your contacts, raise funds for different purposes. I think having your contacts online and easily available to you, I think it's a great opportunity for you to kind of really get awareness about your effort or your idea. I think it could be used in a very similar way to what we use at the moment Facebook for. I know there are a lot of groups on Facebook to raise money for cancer research and different issues which we see in daily lives. So I think it can definitely be used, and there are a lot of examples out there to kind of really prove the idea of social entrepreneurship online.
Okay, I'm just going to ask Norman, what's your take on it, Norman?
Well, I think that my concern around this question is about innovation, and whether what we're seeing is the be-all and the end-all of innovation. I think it's not. I think that one of the problems we've got, and this is why I think this discussion is very important in terms of making this distinction between what young people are actually doing, what their actions result in, and then what subsequently happens on top of that, and the adult discussion that happens around this. Because, for example, when I look at things like Facebook, and you think that this is social networking, I think, no, actually it's not. I think there's that's the problem. We're by flattering the kids and saying, isn't it wonderful what they're doing? Actually, Facebook is not very good when you think about it. It's quite cool, and it's got all these applications, but there's numerous problems with Facebook with regard to real social networks in terms of where you have stuff anywhere on the internet, offline, online, and how that's managed through something like a Facebook. I think it's got a long, long way to go to solve real problems. And this is one of my frustrations. And the reason why I say this is because when I was working for Orange, working for a huge telecom operator, and you looked at what we were doing in that space and how we could innovate around social networks. There you see the real possibility of social networks, precisely because we are able to capture the data of everything that you do with your communications technologies, which actually expresses what your real social network is. Just put it to you simply, perhaps on your phone you can see the last 10 calls that you made, received, or whatever. But as an operator, we can tell you every single call that you ever made, to whom, how quickly you answer to somebody, how whose messages you ignored, who you deleted, who you saved, etc. In other words, my point is that we have the data to tell you what your real social network is, not invite your million friends, who are not really your friends, and then you get all this rubbish. In other words, I think that social networking, we haven't actually seen the real potential of this. I think that what we get here is an inkling as to where this can go. But I think we got a hell of a long way to go, much further to go, and that's why I think we need to raise the bar around this discussion and not flatter everybody around this, because they're just getting onto stuff by accident. This is what's happening. I mean, the impetus behind social networking has got very little to do with the actual technologies that people are developing. The technologies are constraining what people are trying to do through these social networks, and that's the problem here.
Yeah, I think there is a difference between. I mean, why should it be a problem if people are just stumbling across things? That's fine. And I think there is the other slightly scary thing about the whole thing is, and if you actually rank it up to Google and what you were just saying, is this ability to be able to know everything about someone because of every click they make on their mouse. That data becomes knowable, and if you're looking at that from a business perspective or even a philosophical perspective, that's probably the single scariest and yet most exciting thing about the web from a business perspective, for sure. But I mean, I was just struck last week when Craig Venter published his his autobiography, and he said he sequenced his own genome, didn't he? And he put that he kind of published it to the world. And he said something to the effect that, you know, my Facebook page, I think he said my Facebook page, but something to the effect that my social networking profile tells people much more about me than my genome does. Because of course it does, it's expressive and personal. It's not a series of, you know, binary clicks and things.
Okay, very quickly, and then get your questions ready, I'm coming out, but...
Right. I wanted to just develop this point and also refer to some earlier discussion about privacy and all of that, because the point is that if you look at what young people are doing, there is no notion of privacy. If you look at blogs, if you look at the kinds of stuff that young people talk about online, and we did an extensive survey of what's happening on blogs, etc. Young people, you know, the whole point about why they're doing this is because they don't have the old mechanisms of self-expression. The most important thing about blogging is not actually the content of what you write about. It's about getting acknowledgement. The key thing that young people do before they go to bed is they'll put something on their blog, and the most important thing when they wake up in the morning is to see if somebody's responded and posted something to their blog. Because if people post to your blog, you are acknowledged, you therefore exist. It's like your buddy list in your instant messenger it tells you about who's in your group, who's out. That's the kind of real estate that's fundamental to you. And just think about it, if you can, for those of you who still have that memory of what it was like to be a teenager, of how passionate you are about who's in your group, who's not, etc. It's very fundamental. Now, the point here is that as a consequence of this, as far as the offline and online world is concerned, they don't make a distinction any longer between the offline and the online. This is one world. And for them, the notions of privacy, and this is where I think we have seen a transformation in behavior, which I think has got some concerning elements to it for the future. They do not see a distinction between private and public anymore, between what they should be saying internally and what they say externally. And I think that's got a huge implication for the future, for public space, etc. So that's something the audience...
Robin's just got a quick point, and then I'm going to go out. And Raj has got a quick point. Quickly, guys, and then we're going out.
All right, well, I essentially would... what Norman was saying earlier about innovation, about over flattery of Facebook, I'd essentially like to agree, because in some of the research for this this debate, I was thinking about using email in an office. Most people work in an office will use email all the time. I honestly didn't know how an office operated before email was invented. I discovered you had to write a thing called a memo and give it to a lady who came round every half hour to send them around the office. That's absolutely bizarre when I think about it. And it shows that, you know, what has actually had the impact in the world of work, which I think is probably quite an important part of how society operates. So I imagine it would have increased productivity a lot, would be email. Facebook as a thing which is just to show what kind of music you're interested in or whatever, as yet hasn't had that same kind of impact. So I was just...
Thank you.
Just a quick point to kind of second Norman. I think it's a very good point about privacy. I really think that this has been an issue for online networks for a long time. I mean, looking at the evolution of online networks, looking at Friendster, and then there's MySpace, and then now there's Facebook, and throughout the time, privacy has been an issue for them, and they've been improving on it. Now, if you see on Facebook, there are more privacy features than on MySpace, and MySpace has more features than Friendster. And in the coming days, Facebook has announced that they will be working on the privacy further on to make it, so you can form groups on Facebook and make it so that, you have different settings for different people. I think it's definitely an issue, and I'm sure all of us are looking to resolve it at some point.
Okay, I'm now going to go out to the audience, so get your hands up and let me see who would like to speak. I'll try and get as many of you in as possible. So we've got mics. I'm going to go, there's a guy in the front, right here. That would be you. I'm going to take a bundle of questions and come back to the panel and then go out again. Let me just keep your hands up so I can see you.
Go for it.
Yep, go ahead.
I think what the important thing is here, people have been saying it's not really like real friendships, it's a substitute maybe. I think that it is real friendships. I mean, what's happened is, in the old days, we talked to people who were in our town or in our city or wherever we lived, and that was our friend group. Now what the web has done has opened it up. I've got friends from America and Canada, and it's basically it's no less meaningful because it's done over a keyboard. It is the same type of communication.
Thank you. Okay, now I've got lady in green just there.
To ask a question, now it's on, yeah, about the question of the private and the public. For Norman in particular, is it really true that teenagers don't distinguish between what is said in public and what is said in private? Because there are some researchers who claim that they are continually trying to find ways of setting up a space where basically they can have out the discussions with their friends about things that they don't want their teachers or their parents or adults to find out about, and they are continually searching for that. So surely they do still have some sense of a distinction between the private and the public.
Okay, I've got just there, waving the pen around. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, I do think young people distinguish between what they say on the internet and what they say in their lives, because that's just common sense. I mean, you don't wander around like just saying random. I mean, because people still have like this sense of social, what's appropriate and what's inappropriate, and like so they know not to like swear at their teachers, but they can talk about them on the internet and like say what they want. But because they're more open on the internet, people think, like, I think it's opposite to what people think. People think that they're open in life and then would be more private on the internet, but it's the other way around. People are more open on the internet, and I don't know whether that's good or bad, but like people are more reserved because it gives you more of an anonymity.
It's an interesting question. I've got a guy in purple just there, and I'm going to come down this side. I've got a few hands. Just keep your hands up.
I thought Norman's point actually about playing and not necessarily knowing what they're doing is really interesting, because it seems to me this issue about privacy and publicness is that the adults are continually looking at the children and seeing what's going on, but the youth of today, that MySpace generation, hasn't really encountered the fact that adults, namely lecturers in particular, from my experience, are also using those spaces as well. So whilst they're looking for this private space, it's not the same as a student common room, for instance, in a physical space, because of the access. And I think that there is a lot of, there's a playing around, and I'm ambivalent as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I think there's a lot of mistakes, I suppose, that are also being made, where this is being positioned, the MySpace generation is being positioned as solely a young person's thing, and actually older people are using it as well.
Okay, now everybody, because there's a lot of hands, we're talking Twitter now, not the Gutenberg project. So I think I had a hand here, the gentleman in the black suit with the white shirt. Can you use the mic, please?
Sorry. I suppose my the area that I'm interested in this particular discussion is whether anything has actually really changed. Obviously the technology has changed, but I do doubt that young people are communicating any more or less frankly than they did in the past. I mean, my teenage years were a long time ago, but I remember spending a lot of time on the telephone, actually. Hours and hours on the telephone talking to my friends, because I had the misfortune of being isolated in a village during my formative years. So, I do doubt that, a point that Norman made, I do doubt that people are that exposing themselves any more than they would have done in the past.
Okay, now I'm going to take about 3 more questions, then come back to panel and then go again. If we could go, there's a lady in grey, then so the lady in grey just here, Martin. Sorry, we've lost, lady in grey just here, right? Then I'm going to come down, if you could just give it to that guy there, then I'm going to come down to this guy. I think there was a white poncho, if I can describe you as that, just there, and then that will be it, and then I'm coming out again. Quickly,
yeah,
everybody.
I wanted to talk about it as a fantasy space, because I've heard quite a lot of discussions about people where they'll put, I've got 14 tattoos, and then there's suddenly a whole thing, shirts don't believe you. The whole idea of also people putting up completely fantasy Facebook sites, which also happen, which hasn't been mentioned, and that would be a kind of different kind of social networking idea.
I think that's really interesting. Okay, we've got a guy in a blue shirt there who should have a mic. And if we could just pass the mic down right to the front, just down here to this guy.
Hi, I think we've got to be careful with this whole idea of social networking, because I kind of agree with the guy there said that what's really changed, and I think that's a very true point to make. And the same sense that social networking is very much a reflection of the times we live in. So therefore, much like blogging was, say, 3-4 years ago, kind of codifies the urge of people to sort of say something, to kind of make a stand or have a comment. I think social networking is very much of the same kind of ilk. And I think it can pass as well, actually, in terms of the way that our relationships to one another also change as well with the times. So at the moment, we are trying to capture connections between each other and our families and so on. So in that extent, social networking does fulfill a positive role. And I think one of the most interesting things about it, which is a good and a bad thing, is that it's about, say, young kids trying to find privacy, their own spaces, but in a very kind of public platform. And I think it's a kind of a moving, continual target, because when they kind of run out of ideas with, say, MySpace, they'll move on to something else. But the urge is to try and find their own kind of secluded area, which, you know, is not for the public or adult use.
Thank you. Just the guy at the front, could you just...
I'm pleased to say I have two colleagues on the panel who I have a Facebook connection to, but I don't think we're still using this technology well, and I've written an article for the Design Council magazine analysing how we might use it better. The anniversary of the web, 15 years last year, I observed on BBC News, we haven't even understood Web 1.0, let alone these new technologies. And I think we've got to be clear that adults are not experimenting, as is picking up on a point Norman made, with these technologies for real purpose. And I'd actually observe, I mean, I would like to know where people are showing leadership in the adult world in using these technologies. And I'd observe even in the Institute of Ideas, you know, that these technologies are not being used effectively. I could give you an anecdote on this, but I won't.
Nico, we might be having words.
It's a culture of experimenting with things that Norman alluded to that we are still too scared of, quite frankly. And it's the one thing I say to my clients is experiment with things. You will learn, and as adults, we will use these things better from experimentation.
I agree with that. Okay, I've just got the white poncho, and then I'm coming back, and then we're going out again. So get ready with your comments on anything and everything. Go.
I think the real question is, MySpace was invented for a reason. All these social networking places were invented for a reason. What was that reason? Well, it's gonna replace something that people can't do in their everyday life. It's going to be something that they just can't do because it's filling in for something else. It's like, I use MySpace for maybe I'm complete scatterbrain and it tells me when my friends' birthdays are. I use it for that. But then I have friends who, for no reason, put up weird bulletins and stuff. I'm like, why are you doing that? But it's just like, it's filling in a reason. It's like, well, why are you going on MySpace? Well, I'm going on MySpace to talk to people I can't talk to outside. Maybe I'm lonely. Don't pity me, I'm a hermit. But it's just, it's filling in something. It's a substitute. So you're saying, well, these friendships on MySpace are not real, but they're substituting for something that is real because you can't have it. It was invented for a reason.
Thank you. Okay, very quickly coming back to the panel. Norman, if I can start with you, and I'll just go down the line very quickly, and then I'm coming back out again.
Well, there's 10 questions. Question number one, to speak to the main, I think what everybody's like touching around, this point about privacy and are the young people, are they looking for private space? How does this kind of relationship work? I would agree, of course, they are looking for privacy. I mean, that's my fundamental thesis is that what's motivating them in the first place, that's attracting them to the technology, is that it gives them the capability of creating some autonomy for themselves and therefore space that they can experiment with. And of course, there is, and I think everybody who's made this point, that young people do know the distinctions between appropriate behaviours in different circumstances. Of course they do. And they know in those circumstances. But the point is that the overriding dynamic here is that when you begin to appropriate the world through this technology, because this is what's happening, and just remember that they do not have an episodic relationship to the technology. It becomes part of what they are and who they are. That's how they are in the world. There's Alan Kay made this wonderful statement about anything that's invented after you're born is technology. They don't think of this as technology. This is how they exist in the world. So yes, this allows them to create the space, but then there is also a fantastic degree of naivety about the fact that this space is something that is now public. It's not private. But where they do still have that quest for privacy, they've invented their own language. Now, I don't know if you, I'm sure young people in this audience will, could if they had to show you the language that they use when they instant messaging or texting or whatever, you wouldn't understand most of what they're talking about, because they have invented a code precisely because they're sitting in their living rooms with their parents, perhaps on the computer, whatever, doing instant messaging or whatever, and even in the presence of adults, they're having conversations that adults can't follow, precisely because they've created this kind of coding and all of that. There is a kind of language. So yes, of course, they're conscious of that. But the point, nevertheless, is that once you publish something out onto a blog, which perhaps if it's a private blog that only your friends can see, and it's kind of password access controlled, fine. But most of them aren't. They are freely available. And when you see the kinds of things, and we've done a lot of research on this, when you see some of the stuff that's being discussed, you know that that's what young people are thinking about, because that's what young people think about. There's kind of all the kind of crazy things that the kind of, just think about all the hormones that are running around in your body, and all the things that are going on, and the passions and everything. The point is that becomes public. And there is a naivety there, and I think there is a discussion to be had about what the consequence of that might be in the future.
Norman, I'm just going to have to hurry you a little bit.
All right, well, that's my main point.
I think we could go on with this, and do grab anybody on the panel afterwards to have a word with them if you haven't had your question answered and it's burning there. But MT, what do you make of it all?
Well, I think, everything changes and nothing changes is true. That's what I was really talking about the humanist point, is that, it'll end up being a human thing, human scale, we'll do human stuff on it. I think it is very important to say, though, this question about some people saying, this question whether it's real or ersatz, your relationships online, and I would definitely say that they are real. These are not, they may be substituting for other things, we may not be able to do all those things, but that's what's so potentially wonderful about it. I mean, thank God there's this place that we can go on and find lots of friends, talk to people that we wouldn't otherwise talk to very often, and keep connected, and it plays to all the wonderful human characteristics, particularly of kids developing their own identities, of display and expression and forming their identities and experimenting with them, and finding in-groups and out-groups and belonging and all of those things that are so much part of establishing identity. And I think it's a wonderful way now that young people, and not just young people, of course, are doing that. I think the privacy thing's interesting. I think we are definitely in the early stages of media literacy here. I mean, kids are not particularly media literate yet in this environment. They're pretty savvy about predatory behaviour. I think they are pretty savvy about that, but probably much less so at the moment about privacy issues and about just who might be able to view, maybe not now, but in 10 years' time, what they wrote then. And I think there is a little bit of naivete about that. But again, I think that's a transitional thing. I think it's a media literacy thing. So again, I'm optimistic about that. I think really we shouldn't worry so much about it. It probably isn't the same as Gutenberg inventing the print machine, but it's a fantastic new tool. It's a fantastic new world.
Thank you. Raj, what do you make of it?
Right, so I'm a bit sad, I'm 25 years of age, and I spend most of my time in the office talking to clients. Most of them tend to be in the US side and Asia side. So although, I use these online networks for talking to these guys. I use Skype to talk to these guys. And I think someone mentioned earlier on about friendships on these social networks. Are they different from real life? I think they are different, definitely different. But you can achieve the same kind of communication online through these different tools, and I think technology is currently working on, but you can't replace the offline kind of one-to-one kind of conversations ever. I mean, if you look at Facebook, the reason why it's so popular is because your offline, your real friends, you can talk to them online as well on Facebook, and that's why in MySpace you'll see you might meet some musicians, you might meet locally in the pubs and stuff. So you can't replace the offline relationship and online stuff.
Thank you. Robert?
Well, yeah, I essentially agree with more or less what the last two speakers said. I think the naivety of the public-private divide is something that most people are beginning to understand, and I think that most people's Facebook profiles or MySpace pages will essentially be, whether you call it a front is possibly too strong a word, but they'll put information that they want other people to see rather than just letting it all hang out. Although, obviously, there are people who do that, and it's a little bit weird when that happens. I also sort of want to come back to I think Norman's kind of thesis behind the kind of online spaces, unsupervised spaces, is pretty interesting, and I do think there's a great deal of validity there. But I'd also say that with something like Facebook, the people it originated with and the people who still are the main users of it are students, a group of people who aren't particularly known for having a great deal of parental supervision, and you have other things like Where Are You Now, which is big amongst backpackers. So I'd say that although I think Norman's got part of the story, but I don't necessarily think you can sum everything up by saying that it's about getting away from your parents.
Okay, I think you might want to come back to that in your sum up. Now I'm going out, so everybody get your hands up very clearly if you want to speak. There's a guy who right in the middle, who had his glasses perched on his head earlier. That guy there. Just keep your hands up.
My question is about relating to the absence of one very key part of friendship, which doesn't exist online, which is, I think, commitment, which hasn't really been mentioned, but it relates to the point here about anonymity, which I think is a very interesting feature to pursue, that you can be anonymous much more online than you can in the real world. And I think while I agreed with a lot of people saying what attracts young people to these spaces is that they can do things there which they can't do in the real world because adults don't let them. I think that's a very important element. But there's another negative element, which is part of the attraction to this, is that you can enter into what appear to be friendships, but in a world in which people are generally uncomfortable with commitment and with real intimacy. And in fact, these things are seen often as being very dangerous, to be too intimate and too committed. And that's the thing that's missing in these friendships. That's why when MT says you can have real friendships, I think it's right. You can say you can have real friendships in the real world, which you can pursue online, and that's great and a very useful thing. But you can't create real friendships, because commitments which exist in the real world, which come with responsibility and accountability. And the thing about being in an online community, you can just walk away. You don't have to feel guilty about not responding to somebody who says, ask you a question or whatever. In the real world, your friendship is if you want to run away, you know you're really letting somebody down. Whereas that is a very different element to what's possible and not possible for an online community.
Thank you. Right, there's like three guys. If you just, three guys in that line, keep the mic there and just pass it between. There's like a line of four of you, right? So you're there and there's one behind you. Then I'm coming over this side, okay? So keep your hands up. Everybody quick.
Okay, I'd agree there's an illusion about young people being naturally adept at technology and good at technology, because by some measures, the current generation of young people are actually very bad at technology. There's fewer kids opting for IT in schools. There's fewer kids opting to go to university for IT. The UK is producing about a tenth as many graduates as industry actually needs in IT. Is there any way from A to B to take this enthusiasm for social media tools and the web and turn it into real enthusiasm for IT?
Thank you.
I just wanted to make a quick couple of points in response to Robin's original presentation, if I may. I think that young people are often guilty of trying to ridicule the debate by highlighting stupid examples, and I think that whilst the CSI franchise might have made a bit of a ridiculous storyline around violence in computer games, I think the debate is still a very valid one. I love computer games, but they're getting more and more violent all the time, and surely there's a point at which we have to say stop. And I also just wanted to make a defence of Steve Webb, if I may, the Liberal MP you mentioned. I recently wrote a report for the Houses of Parliament on how this sort of technology might improve the democratic process, and I went up to meet Mr. Webb as part of my research, and to portray what he's doing as a cynical attempt to reach out to young people is really doing him a disservice. These technologies are just fantastically efficient communication tools, and Facebook has been universally adopted, not just by young people, and what he's doing is opening up a really simple line of communication to him, and it's genuinely, in my opinion, strengthening democracy.
Okay, if you're interested in privacy or the digital commons, there are two debates on that today after this. Now, you, sir, and then there's a guy behind you, yeah?
This one's directed to Norman. So what if the kids are playing at the moment? Because so much learning comes out of playing, and it seems to me that what we're seeing at the moment is possibly the biggest creative, cultural and communications renaissance in the history of humanity. And, you know, at the moment, the children, all of us, we're all discovering, we're all trying to make sense of what these technologies are. Maybe this is the way that we're going to define our humanity in terms of how we communicate with each other and how we solve some of the major problems that are going to face us in the next 20, 30 years.
Okay. Okay, guy at the back, then can I just, there's two ladies just down here, purple and green. Yes, and then I'm going to come back up there in a minute.
So I think very much following on from the last point, actually, I think one of the most interesting things about these new social networking technologies are that the norms are not established. So I think there is extraordinary naivety, both amongst adults, kids, students, in the way they're using it. But part of that arises from the fact that nobody actually knows how to use them yet. We're still making it up. So there's just one point that sort of follows on or picks up on something that Norman was saying before. I think you're right that, you know, one way to explain this is looking at what children don't have today, what young people don't have today, which is their own space. But the thing which really worries me about it is not their experimentation in this space, which is what everybody seems to be worried about, at least maybe not in this room, but at least in the press. But what worries me about it is how quick adults seem to be to try and, how quick they want to close down the space. And it's just, it's, you know, it's just tremendously kind of, that's the huge wave of pessimism that comes out of the whole thing. So I think the experimentation and the creativity is, you know, hugely positive. And the speed with which you want to try and close it down is just, you know, very, very worrying.
Thank you. One, then two, and then I'm coming back up there. Can I just see, okay, there's 1, 2, then 3, then back. So just along that line.
It's to answer the question about was answered asked before the last speaker. So what if we are? This is all about creativity, and it is actually very good for us to let people, teenagers, just communicate online. I actually think there is a real problem here in elevating interaction between individuals online. Never be it that they meet up, discuss, have emotions, experiences, the way most of us as we grew up experienced with other people, means that we are heading towards a society which is completely devoid of any real human interaction. I even was in a session recently where a parent said that the only way he could communicate to a child was online. You know, he could not in his own house have a discussion with his child apart from through Facebook or through something else. And that, I think, is very sad. And I do think, you know, we as adults have to be guilty about the way society is going in this way, and in that sense challenge, you know, what is happening. There's nothing wrong with people using Facebook, but if that becomes the end-all of how society interacts with each other, then we're not going to see any creativity, any innovation. We are going to go backwards.
Thank you.
But actually, I don't think that is what's happening. I mean, I think we do have to keep things in perspective, but I suspect when parents say that the only way I can communicate with my child is online is not because of the technology, but because of the way the particular relationship that they have with their kids. And I also think there's a danger of over egging it, because, you know, statistics indicate that the vast majority of people, kids included, use, and actually kids probably use technology less than adults, because adults use it so much at work. Kids will use technology in the evenings. They might use it only as a very small part of their social networking, and you know, their real networking is that their sort of their social networks are very much about the kind of the real concrete physical relationships, which are then extended online. And I think there is a kind of, there's obviously a lot of fluidity and there's a lot of very exciting things going on, but I think we have to keep things in perspective, because otherwise we get overexcited or over sort of worried. You know, I don't think there's anything to worry about. I think there's a lot to be excited about, but I also think that we have to be careful about not exaggerating the real actuality, which is, I think the statistics show that, you know, most kids only spend about 15 minutes a day online at most.
Thank you. There was just somebody there. Do you still want to speak? Martin, just there.
You guys keep going on about like the privacy of kids, but maybe it's time that they want to like demystify themselves. Like, you know, maybe they want to get their ideas out there without adults like constantly, I don't know, kind of constructing them to be acceptable in the society they live in. So maybe by like communicating with the people around them, we're kind of trying to create a new society to live in, where like not everything has to be private. Like, I don't know, because when people are upset, sometimes people refer to the internet now, but I don't know. And maybe that immediate consolation you get is just much better than having a person there to kind of hold it against you, because maybe we're realising that like human relationships face to face aren't really like what's necessary now. Like it's kind of keeping us back, keeping us kind of passive in like a certain mood, or I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Okay, can I just, if you want to speak, please get your hands right up so I can see you. Okay, right. I'm going to come to this side, but Dave, could you just give the mic? There's 1, 2 at the back. I'm going to come to you in a minute. Don't speak yet. You, 1, 2, 3. And then there's a lot of, just keep passing the mic back, and I'm going to try and get everybody in quickly.
I know. I was just on the discussion about privacy. If I want to put pictures of myself getting horrifically drunk in the library, that's up to me. I don't think it's really the university's place. And I think we need to look more about the outsides snooping and their discussions onto us, rather than say, oh, children don't understand the concept of privacy. There's something very strange in society which can only communicate and only really look up on their children by accessing their Facebook site.
Thank you. Just behind you, right, and there's, just keep going back, and there's 2 guys standing up that I'm going to get in, so just you, yes.
Obviously the internet is about privacy.
Speaking to the mic.
Okay, sorry. But I think it's more about freedom and expressing yourself in a way that's different to how it ever was. It's like, I don't want to sound negative about the life that we're living, but young people have constantly been criticised and like called naive, and sort of the internet has allowed us to express ourselves in a different way in a society where we're quite suppressed, I think, because we won't really, like, I don't want to sound that negative, but like we're not really listened to unless we're talking on the internet.
Okay, thank you. There's 2 guys who both stand up who've been very patient, so 1, 2.
I think at the opening session of the Battle of Ideas, I'm always disturbed when all the panel agrees with each other. And I want to say that the debate about are we optimistic or pessimistic about this, or are we going to have an English compromise, just doesn't do it for me. I think when Norman says the real problem is adults, I want to endorse what he says. And just I want to say for a moment that there are real grounds for pessimism about Blairite, Brownite, liberal adults in our society. At least I'm pessimistic about it. I want to ask MT, when you say the web for purpose, do you have in mind the human scale things? Do you have in mind the sort of human scale carbonista purpose of The Independent? I mean, it's a human scale tabloid ideals. It would claim it's there for a purpose. I don't like its purposes. I think when we're thinking about IT, we might just broaden the discussion for a moment. I heard yesterday in Newcastle a senior landscape architect saying children understand climate change much better than adults. And I think that's a really telling thing. You know, yeah, they've read the Stern report, you know, these 9-year-olds. They understand the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And, you know, the really worrying thing is the reason that view is put forward is that adult teachers go along with the Department for Education in recasting science and geography as project-based, and I might add often play-based learning, where the project is always global warming. So, you know, I think it's a much wider question than IT. Just to conclude, when Norman says children don't or kids don't understand the technology, I think he's entirely right. And we in IT have got to stop saying, develop the IT guys, but don't worry about, you know, people not understanding how it works. You know, they've no interest in what goes on under the bonnet. They have every interest in knowing what goes on under the bonnet, and we've got to train young people to take that interest.
Okay, thank you. Just there.
Thanks. It's kind of a similar point to the one that's been made, but expressed in a different way. It seems that the discussion assumes a distinction between adults and children as a meaningful sociological category, or as a kind of stark antagonism between what adults want and what children want. And I just wonder whether that really exists. If adulthood has been emptied out, childhood as a distinct category doesn't really exist in the same kind of marked way. It just occurred to me, Norman, when you were talking about it, to describe MySpace as a youth subculture, it's not much of one, is it? I mean, compared to a really, something that might be a bit more rebellious in the past. And if there is this aspiration for autonomy, why don't they just go outside and not do what their parents tell them to do? Surely the MySpace stuff actually expresses the fact that they've internalised that risk aversion.
That's a really interesting question. I had 2 guys who were holding onto a mic at the back, so just go and quickly go.
I just want to say about Robin's point about how
you're saying that children get like addicted to certain like games or cultures. But I found myself that the main like elitist people are mainly middle-aged men, sometimes women, but mainly men. just to say that.
Yeah, all I was going to say, going back to Norman's point before about playing rather than learning, is that it's sort of like, it's a bit of a stupid thing to condone, like the natural process of learning throughout like the technology thing. Because like no one's ever told us to
Speak into the mic.
Okay, no one's ever told us to like click the start button and then Microsoft Word to get on Word. You learn it through like experimenting, and to sort of reprimand that as saying it's like you need to slap or whatever he said, I think it's a bit of a pointless.
There you go, Norman. Okay, thanks. Can I just see people who want to speak? I've got about 3 minutes left. Okay, I've got on this side, there's 3 hands up, and we're going to come down this side. 1 hand right at the back. One there, the guy in the black shirt and green tank top, and the guy down here in a grey sweatshirt. Okay, go.
What, me?
Yes, quickly.
Yeah, I was just coming back to the point I think Norman made about the sort of voice and register people use when they're on Facebook and the sort of language they use. You seem to be making the point that like Facebook gives young people the opportunity to use a sort of language that they only use with each other that has always been the same. It's sort of very unique to a sort of young person's how young people interact with each other. But personally, I mean, I would like to raise a point. I think actually the way the internet is, it's actually changing the way young people interact, and I don't feel that like the language that people use when they're on Facebook is anything like the language they use when they're talking to each other, but they're not on Facebook, and they just say, you know, outside. And I think it strikes me that people are actually completely different on Facebook to how they are when they're in the rest of real life. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The guy in the green tank top.
Hi, I just want to just go back to basics first. Why was MySpace created? Now, I've got friends that have actually achieved success through MySpace. Now, they've obviously gone on there, showcased their talent, and they've actually been able to get success through that. Now, if that wasn't there, then how would they do that? Now, in terms of promotion, that would obviously be a costly avenue if it wasn't there. Now that it is there, they can obviously showcase their talent to the world and then put forward the next generation of music. Now, that's MySpace. Now, if you look at everything else, there's obviously LinkedIn. Now, that's for business. If you look at Facebook, that's obviously the original purpose was just to share photos. And in terms of the privacy issue, I think each different site has its own privacy laws. I mean, with Facebook, you can only see your own friends. But with MySpace, it's literally, you know, let's showcase our talent.
Thank you. And you can take anything, you know, do it your own way. So, Norman, are you ready to kick us off with 1 minute?
Sure.
Off you go.
2 things. I think this is very important to make this distinction between what's real friendships and what's not. And I think the point about commitment is a very key one. But the point is that if you stop focusing on Facebook and MySpace, think more about the other aspects of the technology. Instant messaging. The research that we've done shows that what all these young people do is they have a small circle of friends that are their real friends that they really keep communicating with. And they use SMS or IM or whatever, and that's where the real relationship takes place. All these other things are fairly incidental, and they're kind of playful and all of that. But the main point I wanted to come back on was this very interesting question that was raised about are children themselves expressing this kind of risk consciousness themselves in them, in that they have accepted the kind of parameters, and although they've created this space for themselves, it's a very interesting dynamic. I think that the key to understanding here is the intergenerational dynamic between parents and their children, because it's that relationship that constantly gets reinvented and reworked through this technology. So what we see happening is what the literature refers to as the rise of bedroom culture, but the point about bedroom culture is that it comes from 2 sides. It comes from the parents who want their children to be at home because at least they know they're safe, and therefore they're quite happy for them to be in their bedrooms, you know, on the internet or whatever, because they also think that kids getting access to technology in their bedrooms is very important in terms of their education and all that for the future. The kids, on the other hand, subscribe to that precisely because in their bedrooms they get access to entertainment, to blogging, to being able to experiment, to do the self-expression, etc. In other words, a lot of the impetus for this is coming from young people themselves. And that's something we need to understand, and understand how that relationship works out, because it's that which is the dynamic creative element in this whole relationship.
Thank you, Norman. Raj, are you ready to give us your summing up on this whole matter?
Yeah, well, I'll try to. I think young people are using social networking in innovative ways. I really think this is going to be the next big thing. There are obviously issues of privacy. Some don't care about it. To be honest, I don't care about it. And I think I'm a younger audience amongst, I'm sorry, not you, but some of the panelists over here and some of the audience. I think for me, it's not an issue at all. I love to dance on YouTube. I love to post my pictures on Flickr, on Facebook. I don't give a monkey. So I mean, that's really important for me. And I think in terms of being an absolute geek at Quick, I think I've seen through a lot of stats of younger people's profiles on these networks, and I see that they are really innovative in the way they work to their profiles, the way they structure the profiles, and really how they can adapt to technology. I mean, MySpace was obviously initially adopted by young people. So I think, what do people say about it? I think young people are really being innovative and cutting edge in many ways. And lastly, about someone put a question to us about young people and the IT industry and how it could make a difference. And I think, personally, I was initially inspired by gaming and how gaming was so cool to me, and I got into IT, and now I can see me doing different things with IT itself. So I think I'm sure it'll inspire younger people to get in there and hopefully in a few years' time get their hands dirty with the IT industry. Thanks.
Thank you. MT, what's your take on it all?
Very quickly, I'm very concerned about the sort of IT education issue, which I don't know very much about at all. I would say that to get people into IT education, you must be able to tell them that it is the most fast-growing, highest paid. I mean, because I have to hire people to build the sites that we're working on, and believe me, they are hard to find, and we would pay them a lot of money. So that it should be an incredibly attractive field, and I'm sure there are people that want to look under the bonnet, and not just people who learn naturally. Although I think here we do have a science which it is possible to self-teach. I'm sure you would freak out about that, but it is possible to self-teach. I know some people who are incredibly proficient, and they get to it, but they probably don't know the theory. Anyway, so the pricing of the market would be one way to get people in. I do also want to take issue a bit about the commitment thing. I think if you take a friendship site like Facebook, MySpace, the culture of those sites are not about that kind of commitment, and I think you do have issues there. A site like ours, also a site like iVillage, which is really creating a duty of care. It's creating communities of succour and help, and people being constructive with each other. I could show you many, many relationships that are entirely committed, where people have been there for each other in times of need, where people have gone way beyond what was required of them in any friendship, who actually don't even know each other. So it is possible, and I think it has to do with the culture of the site. If it's a befriending site, that's less likely. If it's a site that's specifically around helping or mentoring, then it is more likely. But it can happen, is the point.
Thank you. Robin,
all right.
Final word.
Just a couple of quick things. I want to come back to the guy who asked me the questions. First of all, I'm not going to particularly say that very violent video games are good, but I do think the debate around video games is very much like that around video nasties back in the 80s. There is no evidence that violent video games cause young people to behave violently. That's essentially the truth. So people can choose to play games or not. I think it's essentially up to them. As far as Steve Webb goes, the thing that is important in political debate is challenge. You came back to me and asked me a question, which I think is great, and I'm going to come back to you and tell you that you're wrong. On Steve Webb's Facebook site, you could put the most moronic suggestion ever. I don't know, would he write you back and say, you're an idiot? Because you're wrong about X, Y, and Z. I don't think he would. He would go, oh, that's a very interesting contribution you've had. Patronising, it's not real politics. Real politics is taking someone seriously enough to tell them they're...
Hang on. Save it till outside. We could carry on with this digital comment next. Robin, have you got anything? Okay, sorry to rush you. There's a session here in 15 minutes. Whether you're an old fogey or a young buck, enjoy the rest of the Battle of Ideas. And thank our speakers.